up your lab book to lab 7 again, you've got a picture of what you're looking for on page 55. So page 55 in your lab book, you've got a picture showing the growth characteristics of bacteria in broth. That means what bacteria look like when they're growing in liquid. So the first tube would be no growth. That would be if the tubes were clear, not clear in the sense of transparent. They're still going to be yellowish, but they're going to look like our liquid agar here that has no bacteria in it. You can definitely read through it really well. The second possibility, let's find a good one of yours, is turbid. You see the difference? Okay, turbid means cloudy with growth. The bacteria are pretty uniformly distributed. So this is a turbid tube. That's what no growth would look like. And so that's your evidence that you've got bacteria in there. The next possibility, flocculent, you probably don't have an example of. That's where you've got little flecks of growth that are not evenly distributed, right? Turbid, pretty much the whole liquid is the same color. With flocculent, the background or most of the liquid would look like this, but you'd have little specks of growth floating in it.
Flocculent?
F-L-O-C-U-L, 2 C's, U-L-A-N-T. Page 55. Yep. All right, so the next two, ring formation and pellicle, are going to look the same. You really can't tell them apart. Ring formation and pellicle. I borrowed that one. If you've got one,
Ring formation.
yeah, your spell. Bacillus is probably the one, B. subtilis, that would have it. It would be floating at the surface, but if the, hang on, this happens a lot. If the tube was shaken too much at any point during transit, then it will fall to the bottom. So if it looks like you've got no growth, look up through the bottom of the tube, and if you see that little sediment on the bottom, that was your ring or your pellicle. It's floated to the bottom or sank to the bottom. This is only for liquid. These terms only apply to liquid.
Yeah, that one's not liquid. We should have another.
So with ring or pellicle, the growth should be at the surface of the liquid, but if it gets shaken too much, it'll fall to the bottom. So for your quiz and for your practical, you're going to want to be able to identify those growth characteristics. Turbid is the one you're going to see most often because that's how most bacteria grow. You may find some rings and pellicles, probably not flocculent. Does that make sense? All right, on page 56, you'll see growth characteristics in agar. These you're not going to have to worry about. Look at your agar tubes so you can see the bacteria growing on them. But I find for this lab, they almost all end up looking beaded anyway. Okay? So don't worry about the terms on page 56. Just look at them growing on agar so that you can see the growth. And certainly for your quiz or your test, I'm never going to ask you, was bacillus pellicle or flocculent or turbid? Okay, I'm not going to ask you which specific bacteria had which specific characteristic. I'm more interested if I held up, this tube and asked you what it was, that you can tell me it's turbid, okay? Or that it had a pellicle if there was one in there. Okay, does that make sense? So don't waste time learning which bacteria is which. Just try to identify examples of each. So that's what you'll be looking for in that lab. And when you're done, at any point today when you're finished with them, just bring them up to me at the front and I'll collect them all for the waste container. For your Petri dish in lab 8, your streak plate, most of you did a pretty good job. As long as you've got one little isolated colony, one little dot of bacteria that's not touching any other dots of bacteria, we're going to consider that successful. The more you have, the better, but as long as you've got at least one that's not touching anything else, then you have done what you're supposed to do. Remember, streak plate, you're spreading them out on the surface, okay? And the goal of it was to get isolated colonies. Mounds of bacteria that weren't touching any other mounds of bacteria. Okay? Remember, they all came from one original one that you spread out across the surface. So any questions on either of those?
Back to we were talking about page 55.
Yeah.
Turbid and flocculent. Like this one right here, like would you say this is no growth? Like, I don't see
No, that's
this is
turbid.
no growth.
Nope, that's turbid. That's turbid too. See how
Oh, see, I
all
can't
it is?
see.
Just
Yeah.
messed it up too bad.
No, not at all.
This is the one that has no bacteria in it. That would be no growth, that one's perfect.
Like this one.
Mhm.
Okay.
We probably don't have any that are cloudy. Any other questions? Any other questions on either of those labs? Okay, we'll go ahead and work on lab 9. The first thing you want to do is get one of the bigger test tube racks and pull your 3 test tubes out of the hot liquid so they can start cooling off. And spread them out in the test tube rack. They'll cool off fast.